Welcome to the Roaming Yeti Podcast, where we share travel stories full of nostalgia, interesting locations, and the tales behind those locations. I am your host and head Yeti, Beth Schillaci. In this episode, we dive into the exciting world of cross-country road trips with my guest, Steve McCready. Steve shares his personal experience of a baseball-themed road trip that he took with his father back in 1992. Steve's journey taught him valuable lessons about planning, independence, and the appreciation of the diverse parts of our country. Building on his past experience as a psychotherapist and his extensive study of the human brain, personal growth, and personal performance, Steve McCready is a coach who helps solo and small business owners make a bigger impact in the world. Learn more about him at stevemccready.com. Are you ready to hit the road? Let's roam. Welcome back to the Roaming Yeti Podcast. Today, I have Steve with me, and he's going to talk to us about an interesting cross-country trip he took. Steve, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing good, Beth. Thanks for having me on.
Sure. Just give us sort of that overview of what route did you take on this road trip?
Sure. Okay. So this is a trip that I took. This goes back to 1992. So it was a long time ago now, but basically this was a trip. It actually began in Providence, Rhode Island, and it ended up in San Diego, California. This was a trip that I took with my father when I graduated from college, because I was moving from back east back to California. And so decided as long as I was going to do that move and I was going to do it via the road because I had a car I didn't want to sell. I had a bunch of stuff I didn't want to ship cross country. So I was like, oh, okay, well, if I'm going to drive, maybe I can make this into something fun.
So that's not even like it's beyond cross country. That's like diagonal. It's like really
Yeah,
cross
it
country.
really, it's kind of like, yeah, because it ended up, so all the different stops we made, because we started in Providence, we went to Princeton actually, because it was in addition to my graduation and my dad's 35th college reunion was right after I graduated. So we went there and then to Baltimore,
Okay.
Indianapolis, Louisville, Kansas City, Denver, Albuquerque, Phoenix, San Diego. So there was a lot of
Holy.
stops.
Um, so I know in addition to getting cross country, you guys sort of you started stopping at baseball games, right? That was
Right.
was that
And
planned? Was that something you were going to do, or did that sort of naturally happen as you started driving across?
no, it was planned. I actually spent a lot of time planning this trip. When I had the thought that, like, okay, I'm gonna go back to California after college. I'm gonna drive. And I was like, well, what could I do? And I at the time was very much a big baseball fan. And so I had read a book sometime, I think my senior year of college, about someone who had gone to every stadium in Major League Baseball. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. That was a little bit beyond the scope of what I could do. But I thought, well, maybe I could work out a trip that involved getting to see some baseball games. And so as I started looking and I started checking schedules, I was able to figure out a route and a schedule that fit where it was a combination of Major League and minor league baseball games that we saw. So, but from the get-go, it was really intended to be a trip where it was like, okay, well, if we're going to have to drive cross country, let's at least put some fun into it too.
Right. How many games do you remember how many games you stopped and
Well,
saw?
let's see. So we saw a major league game in Baltimore with the Orioles. Then we didn't see anything in Indianapolis, but Louisville we saw a game. And that was again a AAA baseball game. Kansas City we saw the Kansas City Royals, so that was major league. Denver was at the time still a minor league city. It was the Denver Zephyrs at the time. That was before the Rockies were around. And then both in Albuquerque, we didn't actually see a game because the scheduling just didn't work out, though they had a AAA team at the time. And then, but in Phoenix, we also saw a game again back when they were a AAA city before there was Major League Baseball in Arizona, and then back to San Diego, which was where my dad was living at the time.
Very cool. How many days did you take for? I mean, again, this wasn't just cross. This was sort of zigzag. So
Right. Well, so once we basically it was 1 day to get from destination to destination
okay.
once we left Princeton. And so so we were doing those 1 day at a time, and most of those were not too bad. I think The longest one, I believe, I'd have to check all the mileages again, but I think the longest one was Kansas City to Denver. And that one was not, no, it wasn't bad from the standpoint of nothing awful happened. It was just kind of boring because that's a very, very boring, flat, straight stretch of highway.
Yes, I've
And
done that. I've done
yeah,
that stretch. You feel like you're on a treadmill a little bit.
right. There's just not a whole lot going on. So that was the hardest part. But we that was part of the thing though, is I tried to set it up so that there wasn't excessive driving in any one day. And so we weren't in any rush. We didn't have any other stuff going on. And we would just kind of swap back and forth. My dad had a camcorder that he had gotten not that long before. And again, this is 1992, folks. So a camcorder was for the time fairly small. It would be huge by today's standards for any kind of thing compared, because we just, of course, use phones. But we did a lot of, so whoever wasn't driving would be either filming scenery, or we would have some conversations, or things like that. So we found ways to kind of keep ourselves entertained as we went along the trip.
That's a lot of fun. I mean, because again, 92, that that technology wasn't in everyone's hands. So to do that is really a fun thing. Um,
The thing
and
I haven't done yet with it, unfortunately, that I still need to, is I have the tapes from
oh,
that trip,
you
and I
haven't
have not
digitized.
yet digitized them. So I need to talk to our fellow unemployable Marcy about that. But look at doing that, because I'm sure there's a lot of really interesting, fun stuff there from the trip that
Yeah.
I should turn into something for sure.
Yeah, I mean that's cool to just have those as memories and sort of a legacy as well. Um, so I know you went on the trip to because like it was a logistic thing to move, but was there sort of another motivation to make it a road trip with your dad rather than flying or just sort of making it a straight shot, or what was sort of in your mind, why did you do that?
I think there were a combination of things. I mean, certainly it was the like, wow, here's this cool opportunity to get to see a bunch of baseball games,
Hmm.
not something that would necessarily just be there. I knew, I didn't know when I would have the kind of freedom that I had in that space, right? Because as I get done with college, I didn't have a job. I was literally going to my dad's house to stay there for a while I figured out what the heck I was going to do with my life. And so it was a really good opportunity for that. Number one, it was a good opportunity for my dad and I to get to do something together, to do an adventure together, and a different one. And it was, for me, it was the first time I had actually planned a trip. Like, I did all the planning for it.
Hmm.
And so there was a little bit of, I think, a kind of, growing up moment there of, look, I can do these kind of adult sort of things, and I can plan things, and all of that. But also I thought it would be, and it really was, an interesting opportunity to get to see a lot of different parts of the country, right? I got
Hmm.
to be in a number of places that I had never seen before. In fact, I think probably pretty much all of the cities that we went to and through, I don't think I'd been to any of them
Okay.
previously.
Hmm.
And so I got to see, literally not the whole country, but like all across the country, and just a lot of very different areas and environments. And so it was really cool from that standpoint too. So yeah, it was a very interesting experience.
So how did you did all the planning. It was very good adulting, shall we say. But like how did you prepare for the trip? Like what went into that planning? Especially
It would be
especially with
so much
limited
easier.
internet. No, yeah, very limited internet, right?
No internet.
None. Okay.
1992.
Right.
So yeah, literally no internet. So what I had to do is basically I had to do things like make phone calls, right? And so but what I did is I was able to get schedules, because scheduled baseball schedules were published. And so I really started by working with a map and really working out different routes, and then starting to figure out where are cities that make sense from I think I was trying to target like 400 or 500 miles a day as
Okay.
far as how far to travel, and looking at what are cities that fall into that range that have a major or minor league baseball team, and then starting to check it against schedules.
Hmm.
And I actually got pretty fortunate that a lot of the timing of this worked out as it did in retrospect. But then it was like, okay, so finding hotels in those places and all of those things. And it's, it wasn't, it seems really primitive now, because nowadays it would just be like, okay, I'm just going to, go online and I could probably do it a lot faster. It took me, I don't remember exactly, but I know it took a while because I had to put all these different pieces together and plan it, and to find hotels. But again, back in the days before the internet, we had other ways of doing this. We had travel guides, we had, things like that. And so it was just a matter of doing research the old fashioned way and putting together a plan, just with the basic constraint of, I'd like to see as much baseball as possible. And I want to try and make the travel not more than 400 or 500 miles a day if I can. And I think there was no good way to get Kansas City. There's kind of that dividing point there. And it was like, it really wasn't anything to do, but like, okay, we've got to go Kansas City to Denver. And that's a bit of a trek, but that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. That's like, I knew you had said 92, but it really hadn't hit me till we were just talking. I was like, oh yeah, that was like, there wasn't go into AAA's Triptych online and put in your locations and let them figure it out for you.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It was a very, very different kind of thing. But again, people have done stuff like that before. And there was just different tools, not ones that were as fast or as simple to use, but definitely still there,
Exactly.
So, yeah.
And you said you stayed in hotels, so you booked those ahead of time. You weren't sort of just show up and
no, it was not. It was not show up.
Done that.
Right. And then for the major league games, I arranged tickets beforehand just because I wanted to make sure, that those would be available. For the minor league ones, I don't believe I worried about it because minor league baseball, especially back then, was not that big a deal. So I wasn't too concerned about them being sold out or anything. But the major league ones, I just, again, looked up the schedule, called and was like, hey, I want to get, seats for this day. Again, back how we used to do that back in the day. And just had them keep those at will call so we could go and pick them up. And that was that.
That's very cool. Did you have what was your favorite stop along the way?
It would be really hard to pick like per se a favorite. No, probably from a baseball standpoint, probably Baltimore, because that was when Baltimore the new stadium at Camden Yards had just opened that year. So it was brand new. And there was a lot of talk about it. It was really the beginning of this era of these new, really well-designed stadiums. And so getting to see that in person when I'd heard about it and read about it and was kind of an architecture fan, like that was super cool. And so it was a great way to start the trip off. So on one hand, that was really cool. But every place that we went, because they were all so different, was pretty interesting and had different elements to it, right? Like one of the things that stuck out to me in Louisville, the stadium itself was very unremarkable, some old random stadium, but the people there were incredibly friendly. Like I just was amazed by just how friendly people were everywhere that we went there. We had several conversations with people in the stands during the game, which was not something we experienced elsewhere in the country, and so there was like that. And then getting to see Albuquerque, we didn't see a game there, but seeing Albuquerque, where it's got such different architecture than the rest of the country, and different climates along the way. So really everything was cool in its own way.
Well, as a Marylander, I appreciate your appreciation of Camden Yards.
Yeah. And Baltimore was cool too. We had some time to kind of explore and go around. So it was really a great opportunity for me to see a lot of different places, either whether it was actually being there or also driving through. We had a few really random, like I always remember of all places we stopped, I think this was in Kansas, right? So we're in the middle of that drive. And so we're trying to figure out some place to eat. And we're like, okay, well, we're going to eat. And we see, like, I think we saw like an ad, sign by the side of the road, something about the Pizza Hut somewhere or whatever. So we pull off the freeway and go down this road, it's again, literally middle of nowhere. It's flat as far as you can see, because we're in the middle of Kansas. I don't even remember the town we're in. And here's the Pizza Hut. We go and walk in, and everybody in the place, there wasn't a ton of people, probably 6 or 7 people, like all the heads kind of turn and look at us and give this kind of look like, you're not from around here. Right. And then they just went back to their business. But it was like, what have we just walked into? It's really funny.
It's just a Pizza Hut, right?
Right. It's like, yeah, we're just stopping. I mean, we can't be the only people who've ever hopped off the freeway to get pizza here, but hi.
Yeah, that's great. Were there any other good food stops that you enjoyed along the way?
I'm trying to, at the time, I wasn't a big food person anyway. So I'm trying to think if there's anything that particularly stuck out to me food wise. Is a lot of it is we were trying to be relatively low budget about at the time, because remember, just out of college and unemployed.
Exactly.
So there was a lot of fast food. There was a couple things like seeing where you would see some of the regional differences in fast food chains.
Mm-hmm.
We stopped. It was like a Wendy's in West Virginia, and I don't remember specifically. There was something about, I think that might have been the first Wendy's where I'd ever actually seen like a salad bar or something. I don't remember, but it was
the Wendy's buffet of the
Yeah,
90s.
it was the buffet, right?
Yep.
Exactly. It was like, it was like, oh wow, this is different. That's what it was. It was like the buffet, and they had pasta and other stuff, and it was like, oh, this is kind of weird. And I'm trying to think if there's any other. I don't think there were, and a lot of it, of course, because what we were doing is usually lunch was just like hop off the freeway at whatever, some fast food place, because it didn't. This is a thing where today I would do it really differently, where I would actually research restaurants along the route and find cool places to stop. Here it was more like if we saw something or whatever, and then we were mostly eating dinner at the baseball games. Right. So I ate a lot of hot dogs.
Yeah. Well, and that was before, like, now a lot of these minor league stadiums and stuff, they have all kinds of fancy, crazy food because they're trying to keep people there. But I'm assuming that you pretty much ate hot dogs.
It was pretty much hot dogs. There was no fancy food, and the stadiums as a whole, like so the like I said, Louisville was this very old kind of random place that was, I think it was clearly used for some other purposes too. Like it was a weird shape and whatever, but it was still cool in its quirky sort of way. Mm-hmm. Denver at the time, the Zephyrs were playing in Mile High Stadium, which is a football stadium. And so they converting it for baseball, you end up with, I think it was, I don't remember if it was right or left field, but one side was a very, very short field with a really high wall. So similar to how Fenway Park works, but even higher, like just crazy. And it's just weird seeing a baseball game in a football stadium. But Phoenix actually at the time had, their stadium was relatively new, and it was the nicest minor league baseball stadium I'd ever seen. It was pretty modern. It was nice. They didn't have like fancy food kind of stuff that I recall, but it was a really nice new stadium. And the Firebirds, which was the team at the time, was kind of a big deal there. It was definitely like, okay, this is like a whole other level of minor league here.
Right. That's very cool. It'd be interesting to do the trip again and see how stadiums and stuff have changed. Did you learn anything about yourself on this trip? Like either through the planning or anything, like any life lessons?
Yeah, I mean, I think one, I learned like I can spend more time in a car, at least at the time, than I realized, because it was like, oh God, this is gonna be a lot. And I did learn that my dad and I travel well together, because I think both of us personality wise were a good fit for that. As I told you before, we later, whatever it was, 15 years later or so, did a very different road trip together too. But I think for me, a lot of it was just this awareness of, like, again, adulting, right? Of like, okay, I can plan this trip. I can do these things that I think up until then I'd seen as like, oh, those are grown-up things. And not really necessarily seen myself as that much of an adult. Because in college, it's like, sure, you're technically and legally an adult, but you're in this kind of sheltered environment, and it's a lot different. And there's a lot of other things going on. So I think that was one. I also think I had an awareness. That was what really gave me an awareness of that. I knew this to some degree, but I think a deeper level of really how diverse the country was from a like cultural and environmental standpoint. I mean, I knew that in a sense, like I said, because I grew up largely in Santa Cruz, California. This is a beach town, and then going to school in Providence, Rhode Island. I mean, those two places are radically different. Right. but seeing these other spots in the country that are all also very different, it's really just getting how many different types of environments and cultures and different architecture and things. So that was really interesting, and I think cool to see how much variety there really is. And I think it gives you a new perspective. Like, you learn how big this country really is when you drive across it.
Right. Yeah, you don't think about how how, how much on all the little subcultures and mini it's really interesting to see the differences. And
Yeah.
what a great learning experience, like when you get out of college, when you think you have it all figured out, to sort of go, oh, look, there is this big country and differences with people. So I know you like in Louisville, people were really nice. And like, were there any other sort of things that you just weren't expecting from areas?
So like I was expecting Kansas to be flat because that's what I'd been told and warned. But it's one thing to expect something; it's another thing to experience it.
Right.
Right. So that was one thing that was like, whoa, this is weird. Um, and again, well, one thing I just did not know to expect and was like, what the heck is this? Is in West Virginia. So as we drove through West Virginia, and I assume these are still there, but at the time I had no idea this was going to be coming. All over the place, you'd see in the hills these clusters of three crosses.
Hmm.
And I was like, what is this? Obviously a religious symbolic thing, but I was not super religiously aware or anything, and I didn't know anything about West Virginia really. And it was just like, this is odd, because it was very much isolated to
Hmm.
West Virginia, right? And so I
Right.
was like, that's interesting. And then that was kind of unexpected. Albuquerque, again, I had been led to it. I knew that it was different, kind of different architecturally, but really seeing it again in person with all the adobe houses and the different style and stuff was really, really cool. The biggest, this was, so the one thing that we saw, but only in driving through, that I wanted to, and actually still haven't revisited, is we drove through Flagstaff,
Okay.
Arizona, right on our way to Phoenix. And it was, I kind of figured like Arizona is just a big desert. And it's actually not. like again, most states in the country are not. We think of them as one thing, and they're very few of them really are. And seeing Flagstaff, which is one at higher altitude and two just has lots of trees and things, it was like, it reminded me a little bit of Lake Tahoe here in California, in
Hmm.
a sense. And it was just, but it was really neat. I was like, well, this place seems cool, and I'd like to go, spend more time there.
Hmm.
Have not made it back. And then like Phoenix was, again, I was prepared for it to be hot, but it's again one thing to hear like it's hot, and it's another thing to experience the
Right.
heat in that form. Because while I live in Sacramento now, and we can get pretty hot here. Until then, again, I grew up in a beach town. Like 78 degrees was kind of hot.
Right.
So triple digits is like, whoa, this is a whole other thing. And then to have it be that warm in the evening, and Albuquerque was kind of like that too. So it was both weird, but also kind of nice, because it wasn't humid like New England can be. It was just
Hmm.
like, oh, this is warm. So there's just a lot of things that I had to set, you have this kind of sense in your head of like, well, here's probably what it is. And so
Right.
it really, I think, probably helped me to understand, guess what? These assumptions that you make by default, they're not very accurate.
Right. It's so true, I think. And I don't know, I'm starting to think like maybe we should make every college graduate drive cross country, and that's just sort of a life learning thing. Um,
I do think everyone should drive cross country once. I'm not sure if
mhm.
they should do it more than that, but
Yeah.
I think it's, of course, that creates some logistical issues unless you're renting a car. But if you do it right, I think can be a really powerful and interesting experience. And you could do any number of themes, right? You
Right.
could do, like today, if I was going to do it, I would do it either as another baseball one, which would be cool, or I would do like a like pizza and brew pubs one, where I would just
Oh,
kind of plan it around that way, which would be great. I'd also have to make sure I worked in a lot of gyms, or I would end the trip 20 pounds heavier. But
you have to make
uh,
sure every hotel has a fitness center.
right, exactly.
Yeah, I that's a good theme. I might steal that one. Um, what do you wish you would have known, or, you know, before you went on that trip? Was there anything, or were you sort of mentally prepared and physically prepared for what came, other than
I mean,
Kansas?
right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I don't know. And I don't know that knowing that would have helped. It just would have made me be like, oh, Kansas is coming. And sorry, Kansas, nothing against your
No,
state.
we
It's just,
love you, Kansas. It's
it's
just
flat and
70
it's
in
just
Kansas is bad.
70 in Kansas. It's just, there's not a whole lot going on there. Yeah. And so, I don't, I was, it was again, as these things go, remarkably like just pretty smooth. It was, and so I think that's in part planning, in part my dad and I are kind of compatible travel energy. So I think that in retrospect, I don't know if there's anything I wish I had known, but like it's the if I had it to do over again,
Hmm.
I would think about possibly like one thing I might do is actually make it twice as long and spend 2 nights in each place. So I would have the opportunity to do more exploring because we would often, pull into whatever um, city we got into somewhere between like 4 and 5 in the afternoon. And then by the time we got into our hotel, settled, whatever, and there was like time to go to the game. So there was not really a lot of time to explore any of these places.
Right.
And all these cities are interesting in their own different ways and stuff. So something where I could get to do a little more exploration, I think could be good.
Hmm.
And do that. Yeah, because otherwise the pacing, like the driving, except for that one day, was totally fine. It was a lot, but not ever where it felt like, oh my god, I need to get the hell out of the car. I'm going to lose my mind.
That's good because that's half of it. If you get bored in there, it makes it even longer.
For sure.
Do you have any if someone now is looking to do a similar trip, whether baseball or anything, just a long road trip, what saying 2 nights in a place is I think is really great advice, but are there any other recommendations you would have?
There's see some things. One, if you're going with somebody, make sure it's somebody you travel well with.
Hmm.
Because there are people travel in different ways, right? In different styles. And if you're not compatible with your travel partner, it can make the day a lot longer. And that's definitely one thing. I think for something like that, it's the right mix. We got lucky. We didn't have anything come up that really threw off our plan.
Hmm.
No unexpected challenges or surprises. And I think though having being aware of that's probably good, and just it just really comes down to like we got lucky where we didn't hit any weird like road construction issues or anything, but we would have
Hmm.
had no way of knowing. Today you could know
Right.
because a lot of that stuff is planned and prepared and you'd be able to see it on a map. So I think it's just really be having a theme to it, I think really helps to organize the trip. And I think the fact that we didn't try and overdo it also, it didn't feel stressful. It was like it was, in fact, the games were great because it was after traveling all day and being cramped in a car, getting to go sit in the stadium, have a hot dog and some peanuts and just kind of relax with a
Hmm.
baseball game, which like that's one of my, for me, sitting at a baseball game is just an inherently like relaxing, centering, calming activity, which is part of what I like about
Right.
baseball. And so having that as a core component of the trip, I think really, really helped keep it from feeling like a grind. Right.
Right.
And that's, I think really it is like build in. How do you manage the energy flow? I see a lot of people who do trips where they try and jam so much in and then it becomes stressful.
Right.
So that would be one is just balance your effort and recovery, just like in everything else in life. Right.
Right. You can't push too hard because then it does become a chore and it's not fun anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
But I definitely love the theme idea because I think you should have a theme for anything you do. So.
Yeah, another one that I would totally do with my partner, although I think we would, she and I are both now old enough that like we can only do so much of this, but we've joked about the idea of doing a roller coaster road trip where basically
Mhm.
we go to amusement parks all around the country, and do some kind of a loop there with the same idea. That one would definitely take a lot more days because you just need time to have our bodies recover from getting spun around and turned upside down and stuff. But anything like that where you're bringing in some kind of a fun thing. It gives you something to look forward to or some, again, element of theme. I would also tell people like, um, keep a journal as you go.
Mm.
Or again, film it like we did, or whatever. Because I do have a journal that has some notes in it. I've got these videos, and that's a really cool way to be able to capture and remember it, because there are parts about it that you will ultimately like forget, because
Right.
humans and human brains and how they work.
Exactly. Yeah, and you're doing so much that it's hard. You're like, oh, I'll never forget this. And then sort of all like, which day did we do? So I,
Also, make sure your car is it's in good shape. We only had one issue at one point. I had some weird wiring issue with my car, and it was somewhere, and it was on the last day too. That thankfully, like, the trip was really smooth, except for this. We had two incidents with involving the car the last day. One was I had this weird wiring thing that turned out to be related to my car alarm, and we stopped somewhere, whatever, bathroom, food, or whatever, and then the car wouldn't start.
oh
And
no.
finally got it started. It took some weirdness, but got it started. But then the other thing is I got pulled over for speeding in Gila Bend, Arizona, of all places, which is, yeah, if you haven't heard of Gila Bend, that's because it's tiny. And it's one of those spots where you hit this zone where, unbeknownst to you, even though you're on the freeway, as you go into the town, the speed limit drops like 20 miles an hour. And I
Hmm.
didn't see the sign and didn't notice. And they've got cops hanging out there because it's, not the first time. So I get pulled over, and my dad, which I'd never seen him do, it was great. My dad goes into like total, like, let's try and talk him out of this. He's like, so he's super polite, officer, we've been on a cross country road trip, and we've been driving for 6 days, and this is our last day, and we're almost home. And so we just, it's one of those things, and the cop let us go. It was like, I was like, all right, Dad, impressive. But it was definitely kind of like, okay, this last day, it was like, we felt like we're kind of, staggering to get home here at the tail end of it. But at least it happened then, because if that kind of stuff had happened on the front end of the trip, it would have made it feel a lot more stressful, or a lot more anxiety of like, oh my God, are we going to get more of this?
Right.
You know,
Yeah,
so
that's
yeah,
good. Yeah, not all heroes wear capes. Some can talk
for sure.
your way out of a speeding ticket.
Right.
I love learning about this road trip. It just seems like a really cool thing to do. I'm so impressed you did this. I know there's maps and there was ways to do it, and at the time it didn't seem difficult, but like thinking back now, it's like, oh,
Right.
we are really lucky now.
Well, yeah, one of the things I did invest in was like a Rand McNally, like, US Atlas, right? It's one of those things, and it's like big. It's probably, I don't know, 11 by 17, right? This big giant thing. So we had maps of, one, the whole country, but two different places. So we could do that. Cause yeah, we had no navigation. We were having to like follow signs and do all that. It's not that hard because we were on major freeways the whole way.
Right.
Um, but yeah, that's an example of something that today would just be infinitely easier, because you just tell Waze or your navigation app of choice, here's where we're going today, and tell you
Exactly.
what to do. But
Uh,
yeah,
yeah, so I have some pop quiz questions that I don't send
cool.
along. And I don't think there's anyone better prepared to answer this first one, but what is your favorite road trip snack?
My favorite road trip snack is probably peanuts.
Okay. Just you go roasted, salted.
Well, if I'm driving, I'm gonna go with, like, I'll just give me a bag of like the Planters cocktail peanuts. The only problem is it does make your hands a little salty. But if I'm at a baseball game, I want,
Mm,
ones
shelled.
that I'm actually shelled. But um, driving, that gets really messy unless you, like, I guess, want to throw them out the window, which is its own kind of problem.
Yeah.
But yeah, probably peanuts, because they're good protein and not too messy, and they don't melt.
That's a very good point. Yeah, the melting is definitely something that you have to keep in mind on the road.
Yeah.
Um, do you have what's your next planned trip? Where are you heading next? Any kind of trip, not just road trip.
So not planned yet. The conceptualized trip that we are starting to work on planning. We've actually, my partner just got back from an 8-day trip with her daughter and her daughter's boyfriend up to Washington, and we had done a camping trip recently too. So we're kind of, and I've been in Denver for a business trip recently. So we're all traveled out at the moment. But the thing there's a few things we want to do. So one is we want to go down to Universal Studios specifically so we can go to Super Nintendo World of all
Yep.
places. Because, yeah, I know I might be 52, but I still like to play Mario Kart. So, but like all of us as a family, me, my daughter, my partner, her daughter and boyfriend, we all like to play Mario Kart. And so it's like, that's kind of one of our family things. And so we want to go do a trip down there. We want to do a trip to New York, and we want to do a trip to Chicago. My partner and I both we're both fans of architecture, and I'm a huge Frank Lloyd Wright guy. And so I've always wanted to go to Oak Park there and to do that. And so there's a lot of different things we want to do. Which one's next? Probably Universal Studios, because that's just the easiest one.
Right.
And that's the one we're most actively doing. But all of those, that one will probably be a car. The other ones will probably be planes. I'm not sure I'm driving cross country again.
Once and done. Do you have like a bucket list trip?
Do I have to pick one? I mean,
No, you don't.
there's still a number of places in the country that I would like to see, but outside of the country, I have not gotten to spend a lot of time outside of the country. I've been to Canada, I've been to Mexico, I've been to France once, but I would really like to see more of Europe. Like to see Italy. I've thought we've talked about doing a Mediterranean cruise, which feels like the right balance of getting to see a lot of things, but not having to like deal with trying to navigate around a bunch of foreign countries. Right. So that's one. I would really like to go up and spend some time in Scandinavia. Because again, never been there, but it's kind of a fascinating place to me. Iceland, I know a few people who've been there and it sounds amazing. So there's just, I don't know, there's really a bunch of them. And it really comes down to, for me, what is either what's speaking to something current for me and what makes sense. The good news is there's lots of cool places to go. And so I try and do the thing of like, what of those, which one makes sense logistically, financially, someone else who wants to go do it, and just kind of what's the way of doing it that will, that'll be as smooth as possible.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's no limit on destinations that are worth going to. It's just
Totally.
Which ones you can.
Yeah.
And then who is on your travel playlist, whether it's a road trip or flying? Like, do you have music you listen to on a regular?
Not necessarily anything super regular. I have a number of different playlists. As I told you before we started recording, I worked in radio for a time, and I've always been a huge music guy. So sort of for me in this era of like streaming music and things is like amazing. Like if I could go back in time and tell 15-year-old me who was just getting the music that, hey, by the way, someday this is how it's going to be, he would have just been like, no way. Wouldn't have believed it, but would have been also like, that's so cool. So I tend to set up playlists by either musical genres, or I have some that I've created that are more musical eras. So like I have like a 70s playlist, an 80s playlist, a 90s playlist, right? And so it really just is about mood and figuring out what's the mood that we need. So sometimes it's something more higher energy. Sometimes it's something a little bit more, a little bit more relaxing. So if you ride in the car with me, you could hear anything depending on what moment it is.
I love that. Yeah, whether you have to stay awake or if you're in traffic and you need to relax.
Or audio. I mean, audiobooks are also a cool thing. My dad and I spent a lot of time. This is probably why we traveled well in this trip. We used to go skiing a lot when I was a kid, and we would drive from like Santa Cruz or the Bay Area up to like Tahoe, which is like a 4 or 5 hour drive. And he got a bunch of old radio shows. When they started putting these out on tape. So this is back in the 80s. So this is, forever ago. But they put them out on tape. And so we would listen to those on trips, which was really cool because these were things that were designed to be listened to, right? Not visual. And they were, so these really good stories. And it was interesting for me from a history standpoint, because we're looking at things like from the 50s and 60s or even the 40s. And so that was kind of interesting. And yeah, so we'll do audiobooks sometimes. It just kind of depends on what's the mood. And I think that's really it. It's like, what do you need? Do you need an energy boost? Do you need to calm down? Do you need a distraction? If I'm driving through someplace that's particularly boring, that's where having like an audiobook is great because it really lets my mind get into the story and I don't worry about the fact there's nothing that interesting visually for me. So
I love it. Well, thank you so much for this time. I, I love the fact that you guys went on this road trip, and I hope other people pick a theme and get out there. But I really appreciate your knowledge and your experience on this one.
Oh, absolutely. Glad to share the story. It was a really fun, definitely a fun and special trip. And hopefully it gives other people some ideas or inspiration, because I think there's a lot of cool things you can do with that, and it can provide both good experiences for people, but I think also good bonding with people and important people in their life.
Definitely. All right. Well, thanks again.
You're very welcome.
Thanks again to Steve for sharing this great story about a fun road trip with his father. You can get all the ways to connect with Steve at the show notes on the website, theroamingyeti.com. And thank you for listening. I hope these episodes inspire you to get out and roam, even in your own neighborhood. So please subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you like what we're doing here, please leave a review and a rating. It helps us so much. Also, to help support us, please head over to yeti2shop.com to pick up some Roaming Yeti merch. I'll talk to you soon, and keep roaming.